The Swedes have a word, racefaber, to describe that unique sensation of when your heart races before the beginning of a trip, when anxiety sets in. It's one of those remarkable things about foreign languages that words have grown and evolved in specific cultures to describe specific sensations that you wouldn't find at home. In English, the closest thing we have for racefaber would be pre-flight jitters, a mongrelized phrase of prepositions, nouns, and verbs. And I think that racefaber is a perfect way of describing how a new player could feel before booting up a powerful horror game, before going on a trip to Silent Hill, Brennenburg Castle, or yes, the Spencer Mansion. It's no rare fact that the original Resident Evil lovingly injected video game horror with so much freshness and depth that it superseded its inspirations. 1989's Sweet Home and 1992's Alone in the Dark were creepy and unsettling, but there's something so gleefully malicious about how Resident Evil treats its player, relishing each goosebump, drinking each nervous gulp. It spawned an entire subgenre, survival horror, to such acclaim that Chris and Jill's first venture into the Spencer Mansion has been made and remade 4 times, if you don't count spin-off titles like The Umbrella Chronicles, which is underrated by the way, good fun with a friend, but I digress. Resident Evil Remake, released on the PlayStation 4, is possibly the greatest remake ever made. Redesigned from the ground up with new areas, new puzzles, and new story threads, anybody wanting to dip their toe into the bloodied water of gamified horror should start here. And the best part is you only need to give the game 10 minutes of your time to see if it's for you. Why is Rezi's opening so effective? How does it psychologically mold you to be a tender, vulnerable meat sack lost in the mansion? This is the first 10 minutes.
Alpha Team is flying around the forest zone, situated in northwest Raccoon City, where we are searching for the helicopter of our compatriots, Bravo Team.
The date flashing across the screen, 1998, brings us back to the past nowadays, but it's worth noting that when Resident Evil first launched, it was purposefully set in modern day to make the coming horror feel immediate and real. Chris, Jill, Wesker, and best boy Barry, who did nothing wrong, speak the language of special forces. Alpha Team, Bravo Team, compadres, detaching the player from any sense of horror. STARS is a badass team. One of them has a gun the size of a horse's d***. Another is sporting sunglasses despite the darkness of the woods. Clearly they kick questions and ask gas later, so whatever mysterious cannibalism is happening in the North American mountains will be no threat to our team. But of course, this isn't the case. Joseph is ripped limb from limb, the camera lingering on his butchering but obscuring the monsters just long enough that the player is encouraged to lean in. That obfuscation means that when we see that they are in fact dogs, the game has already magnified their monstrosity. They aren't just dogs. The flesh is peeling from their bodies. It's blood, not drool, dropping from their jaws. Our main characters, Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine, great names, are immediately on the run, and if the player didn't already feel disempowered by how quickly they've been put on the back foot, watching helplessly as the team is attacked, the fact that it's Wesker, not the characters we'll be playing as, who saves us, reinforces that Jill and Chris aren't as strong as we initially believed. By the time the opening cinematic finishes, the whiplash of experiencing just how gung-ho and strategic this operation started compared to how messy and torn apart it is now is enough to make the player already feel weak. And the opening is just getting started. The game invites the player with a crooked finger and glinting eyes to enter the world of survival horror, the word sitting small and delicate at the bottom of the screen. It's understated, contrasting directly with the full throttle cutscene which opened the experience, and it's also much more than just an invite. It's a command. Playing as Jill, you, Barry, and Wesker rush into the mansion's entrance hall, catching their breath, but it isn't long before you watch as the team is separated and isolated even further. Depending on whose perspective you choose, either Chris or Barry is nowhere to be seen. If you're playing as Jill, the game holds your hand for just a few minutes longer though, joining you up with Barry so you feel safe with a comrade. If you're Chris, you're alone as soon as you enter the dining hall. Both the tank controls and the door animations are staples from a previous era, a calm handling of the limitations of the PlayStation 1, but carrying them into the remake proves that they were effective horror design even in the 8th generation of consoles. The doorways, once used to segment rooms off from each other into mask loading screens, are now acting as a forcible means of keeping the pace of the horror slow and methodical, drawing out the entrance to a new room to heighten the suspense. That term, racefaber, almost takes on a feral quality for a player willing to invest in the atmosphere of the mansion. Every new room introduces a creeping dread of what might be on the other side. The same can be said for the tank controls. They're less finicky in the remake than they were in the original, but the sordid beauty of this system, mixed with the fixed camera angles, meant that the moment-to-moment horror could be specially curated for a player. As you enter the dining hall, the camera is fixed to showcase the end of the table with the ink ribbon glinting cheekily at the player. Once you pick it up and nudge around the table, the perspective changes once again to focus on the typewriter sitting strange and out of place in a dining hall, encouraging the player to interact with it to see why it's possibly here. It draws your eye without any tutorial messages needing to pop up to explain how this works. If you ignore the typewriter and instead run up the left-hand side of the dining room, a bright shock of lightning will illuminate this painting of two swordsmen piercing each other. It's such a peculiar and specific detail that it immediately teaches the player that they need to be aware of their surroundings because they will likely have clues to the puzzles. But because the game does all of this so subtly, through the camera angles and particular perspectives, it keeps the tone engineered towards confusion and helplessness, rather than a strict nodding of the head and awareness that we are, in fact, being lectured to into how to play the game. Back in 1996, would you believe that this hands-off approach was actually due to the fact that Capcom were trying to minimize the amount of translation which would be needed when porting to the US consoles, but as is often the case with these sorts of limitations, it pushed the Resi team to make its guiding hand as seamless as possible. And this isn't even the most interesting thing about the fixed camera perspective. No, we see its greatest asset during our interaction with the first zombie of the game. Exiting the dining hall, our character finds himself in a cramped, claustrophobic corridor, the camera immediately pushing in on us, refusing to let us catch our breath. You'll notice this contrast quite a lot in the early game. In safer areas like the first floor dining room, the camera regularly pulls out away from the player to provide us with a good view of our surroundings, reinforcing which spaces are safe and which aren't. In corridors or rooms with threats, the camera often lunges close, much too close, so Jill or Chris can smell the harsh breathing of a horny gamer watching Jill's jiggle physics or Chris's rippling muscles. What was I talking about? We hear this first zombie long before we see it because the camera is pressed in, somewhere off to the left. We heard a gunshot before, so this might be a clue to our missing pal's whereabouts. The player creeps forth, and this happens. We don't see enough of the body to know exactly who it is. The close-up of the face is just lacking in details, so if we're playing as Jill, there's a chance we'll wonder if this is, in fact, Chris. We pull back from the zombie, and because of how far away this angle is, we can't see the creeping threats sloshing towards us. The player is in a state of panic. We can't hit what we can't see. If you're Jill, you've already started with the handgun and 11 bullets, and on normal difficulty, it will take 10 of those bullets to finish off the zombie, establishing them as real threats. If you're Chris, you just start with the combat knife, having lost his gun in the opening cutscene. Regardless of who you're playing as, the tight space, the tank controls, and especially the muddled camera angles will enhance that panic as we retreat, all because of a tactic the game regularly employs: the lightning-fast perspective changes. The camera changes every couple of seconds in some areas to purposefully discombobulate you. During battle, it throws you off, not sure if you're ever aiming in the correct direction when retreating, but in a larger sense, your understanding of space is challenged to add to the sprawling feeling of the mansion on a micro level. As a location, the mansion isn't that big. If you had the perspective of, say, Resident Evil 4, you wouldn't feel that lost and would find your way around easily, but this changing of camera angles in quick succession will make any first-time player feel dizzy when first exploring the mansion. Love it or hate it, it's all in service of good, tense horror. Even if we take down the zombie, returning to Barry bashes the player over the head with that all-important fact. Enemies won't necessarily stay dead for too long, meaning later when they resurrect as Crimson Heads, it feels like the game has given you fair warning, and it also means that even if you clear out each room as you go, a difficult task due to the limited ammunition and resources, you never truly feel safe, because you know a zombie might just pop his head up to chomp on you. Even with Barry's massive magnum unloading into the pursuing zombie and downing it, it's still not dead. Highlighted to the game when the two of you decide to leave the dining hall and you hear that ominous moaning squelch, slyly noting that the zombie has retreated. By the 7-minute mark, Jill and Barry return to the entrance hall to find that Wesker is gone, and Barry gives us a handy lockpick to use during our exploration. The game gently guides us one last time with our beautiful bearded bro giving us our starting hint. We should start on the first floor. If you play as Chris, you get no such hint, no such gentle guide. When he returns to the entrance hall, Jill and Wesker have both disappeared, leaving behind Jill's handgun for us to use. And so, the mystery deepens. From this point, the player can go anywhere they please, but it's clear by how this room is positioned, with its large double doors, interesting looking pillars, and the fact that it's the only available new space on the first floor, that the game wants us to start here. Walking inside is our first puzzle, and also the most common type which the game will throw at you, so its suitable remake introduces it so early. A statue sits with a strange glinting object inside its vase. The player needs to push a box, climb on top of it, and collect the first floor map. Suddenly, the tension is lessened. We now at least have an easy to follow means of finding our way around, but the game rips all safety from us with a quick jump scare in the following room. By the final minute mark, my Chris and Jill both ended up in very different places. Jill returned to the dining hall to see that Barry was also now missing. We were very much alone, and the game knew it. At the start of this video, I mentioned how gleefully malicious Resident Evil was in how it treats its player. The game feels like an entity. It enjoys creeping you out, and I'll always point to this moment to back up my point. There are bloodstains on the floor. Hope these didn't come from your friends. Even the descriptions are speaking to you now, rather than stating them as objective fact. This isn't Jill's inner monologue, or else it would say my friends rather than your friends. This is the game acknowledging the player's involvement in the horror. You're part of it now. As for my Chris playthrough, he spent a little longer exploring, so in his final moments, he decided to see if he could go outside, back to where the dogs were, and Resident Evil threw another shock our way. In the original game, if you tried to leave the mansion through the front exit, a scene would play where a dog tried to attack the player, but we managed to shut it nice and quickly before any damage can be done. In the remake, something altogether different happens. You've just let a fast, powerful, damage-heavy dog into the entrance hall, and you've just got a small handful of bullets in a handgun that you just got, so aren't completely comfortable using yet. The dog launches at Chris and chews the flesh from his face. And we die. Game over. And because I was obnoxious and didn't think I needed to save back in the dining hall when the game really wanted me to, I have to start from the very beginning. Which leaves the player with two important points of interest. Number one, we cannot leave the Spencer mansion. The only way out is to clench our fists and venture further in. And number 2, Resident Evil is a punishing game. We need to keep our wits about us if we're going to survive the night. The game wants to kill us. It doesn't necessarily take any joy in seeing us succeed. As if our disc itself is infected with the T-virus, this is a horror game which is rabid, frothing, but also Machiavellian in the calculated ways it's going to punish us for trying it. And if you didn't experience Race for Bear at the title screen, I'm sure you would now. Thanks for watching, and an even bigger thank you for 1,000 subscribers. I can't believe it's only been 9 months and we already hit this goal so quickly. The support and feedback has been really touching, so to celebrate, I figured we'd spend the next month looking at one of my favourite game franchises of all time. So welcome to Resident Evil month. In the run-up to Resident Evil Village, I'll be releasing videos breaking down the openings of Resident Evils 1 through 7, building up to a full critique of Resident Evil 8 when it releases. If you liked what you saw, leave a like, comment, or even consider subscribing. It really helps me out, and as always, take care.